Good morning, good morning. It's November, the beginning of the month, and we are so excited to be back and in action because I we are testing if our equipment is working, and I think we are live. My name is Jennifer Town,
And I'm Darlene Rampel.
and today we're excited as we wait for our guest.
Mhm.
We'll be talking about the purpose of grief. Give us a wave if you're watching us. We are testing to see if we are all clear. Oh, thank you so much. I don't know what happened in October. Our equipment is not working, and we are excited to be here. So, today, again, thank you for the thumbs up. We'll be talking about the purpose of grief. And we all have stories about it. Darling, do you want to comment about it while I make sure our guest is on her way?
Yeah. Yeah, we all have grief and we all have loss in our lives.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. I was just thinking about what is the purpose of grief. And as we work with people,
Mhm.
we see really the purpose of grief is to process loss. We're all going to experience loss. And so I believe that, like, we're created to feel all our feelings, to be connected, to be alive and present, and we can't do that if we don't process loss. When we shut down, when we don't allow ourselves those sad feelings, we don't process them, and then we don't actually experience. If we don't experience sad losses, we usually don't experience joy either, right? So I think in order to experience life as a life fully and in present, we need to experience the sad times, the good times. We need to process those losses, and grief is how we process loss. It's a natural, normal reaction to a loss. And so if we can learn to process our grief, we will just be better. We will be able to be present. We'll be able to be with people. We'll be able to be, yeah, just live human beings.
I love that so much, darling. And also, as we start this conversation about the importance of grief, we need to remember we are all grievers, 100%. I love that so much when we realize we are all 100% grievers because we all, when we talk about grief, I love the way we repeat ourselves about this because it's important. When we talk about grief, we just don't talk about loss of a loved one. We're talking about change. We're talking about loss of trust. We're talking about loss of all any change. So
Mhm.
grief is a normal reaction to any loss. So let's talk about what is the process. How do we deal? How do we acknowledge that? So number one is acknowledging the pain.
Mhm.
I love that so much because when we acknowledge the
Mhm.
pain, we're grieving. Okay, let's say there's change. Let's say there's a loss. We need to acknowledge how we feel. I love how you describe that, darling. If you wanna tell us more about that, about acknowledging the pain. How do we do that?
We acknowledge our pain by voicing it, by having that safe place where we can actually express those emotions. So we can't acknowledge something we can't even suppress, or that we ignore. So part of part of um, part of grief is just acknowledging that we're feeling sad, acknowledging that we're angry, acknowledging our emotions. Our emotions aren't bad. It's not bad to feel sad, but those are just natural emotions that come out. So when we have a safe place, that safe person who will listen to us, we can express our emotions, and then as we express, and if somebody's expressing emotions to me, then naming those losses, or naming those emotions, acknowledging them, that's the first step in processing grief.
I love that so much. And you just touched on another point. This is how to deal with the grieving process. So, number one is acknowledge the pain.
Mhm.
Number two, seek out face to face support from people who care about you.
Mhm.
You just said a little bit about that, but face to face is so important. And so, how do we find those people that we can be open and say, this is how I feel, and talk about it,
Mhm.
right? Because we avoid talking about it because sometimes our loss could be loss
Mhm.
of trust. So how do you find that person that you can share face to face and talk about the pain?
Mhm.
How do you do that, darling? How do you find those people? Because I am so thankful I have Darlene. When I'm pain, I talk to her. So my question is, do you have somebody you can talk to face to acknowledge that pain? Because that's the process of grieving. And again, we are all 100% grievers. So Darlene, walk us through about finding that person because she's so good at that.
So the first thing is finding somebody you know, but it has to be somebody you trust, somebody who will listen and not try to fix you, not try to criticize you, analyze you.
Mhm.
If you don't have that person in your life, then you need to reach out to somebody who like a support group. We do grief and loss groups. We do individual counseling. Reach out to somebody who's not invested in your loss. Sometimes whenever we have a loss, sometimes we feel like we can't share with somebody because what we're going to share is going to impact them. So let's say with your spouse, if you have a loss, and especially one in common, whatever you tell that spouse is going to have an impact, and they're going to react to it. Another way is children. Children often won't share their emotions or their grief because they know that their parents already sad or their parents already struggling. And so sometimes it's good to find somebody who's not going to be impacted. It can be a professional, it can be a group online, it can be somewhere where you can find somebody who you can actually be totally honest and not worry about that. What you're saying is going to impact that other person.
Thank you so much for joining us. Please give us a thumbs up if this is helpful because we are waiting for a guest. She's on a
African
I
time.
like to tease her because she said she's on Kenyan time. She's a very special guest. I call her Lady Captain, and she will walk us through about the purpose of grieving and also tell us how she does it. So she is tuning in, and I see someone. Um, so
Hi,
welcome. Well,
thank you.
okay, our friends who are listening, be ready. This is a real treat for us. Okay, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear us? Oh, she's on mute.
Sorry about that. We're gonna unmute our guest. There she
Hi,
is.
good morning.
Good morning.
Can
Good
you hear me?
morning. One sec.
Yes, I can see
So
you.
as Darlene checks the mic with our guests, we just want to continue with the conversation about how well the purpose of grieving and the process. So the first one that we've been talking about is acknowledge your pain. Number two, seek out face-to-face support from people you care about. And I am so excited to share the third one because it's understanding that your grieving process will be unique to you. We are all never the same. Everybody's unique and we deal with grief in different ways. So, be- before I just go on and bubble about this, I'm excited to have Miss Margaret Thande joining us. Can you hear her? Oh, don't you love this? This is when we just laugh and say doing whatever it takes to get our guests connected. Just
I
one
can
second.
hear you. I can hear you.
I love this so much.
Good morning. Good morning. I can't hear you.
There we go. Can you?
Oh, good morning. I can hear you, but I can't see you now.
Okay, you'll see us shortly here. She can.
Okay.
I love technology so much because
Yes, now?
with all the good intentions, there's always something. However,
Yeah,
can you see us now? Because we can see you very well.
I can see you, but it's like you have a curtain in front of you. I can't. I can't- it's like you're behind a drape.
Oh,
Okay. You
Yeah.
know, I think your voice is more important than how we look.
yes.
Maybe we should put our
Yeah.
guests on and then don't look at our faces. So, what we've been sharing, Margaret Thunder, is we've been talking about the purpose of grief. And we love doing grief talks so much. Darlene and I, we do this is a place where we share lessons learned through life and loss. So we're not experts. However, we like to share ideas because we believe when we share stories, when we help each other, we never know who will be touched by our story. And that's why we show up every Wednesday at 10:15 to share with our friends. So we want to say thank you. Thank you, Charlotte, for joining us. Thank you for everyone who is online. And I will stop talking because the guest we have today is very special and dear to my heart. I call her Lady Captain. Welcome, Lady Captain, and
Thank you.
share with us your wisdom about the purpose of grief.
Thank you very much for inviting me to share. I recently, well, not recently, I retired from nursing a few years ago, but I think once a nurse, you're always a nurse. So when I went back, I went back to Kenya. Sorry, I used to work in British Columbia. I was in Creston for many years, and then when I retired, I went back home to Kenya. And as soon as I got home, my mom got sick, and I was nursing her for 3 years. Unfortunately, she passed away, and that was a big blow because I thought I had done everything that I could possibly to get her well, but unfortunately, she didn't. She didn't make it. But she was 86 years old, and she had had a good life. But when you lose a parent, it doesn't matter the age; you still feel the loss. So that was my first loss. Um, and then almost soon after that, I lost a brother, my oldest brother. He also had cancer, and I was nursing him about the same time as my mom as well. But his cancer was very aggressive, and he was only sick for 9 months from diagnosis to the time he passed away. And that was another huge blow for me because he was very, very close to me. Then almost immediately after that, the same year, the end of that same year, I lost my younger sister also, who had some issues. She had dealt a lot with alcoholism and depression, and eventually she succumbed to the complications of that. So it's been a rough time, but yeah. So maybe I should stop for questions or reflection.
Wow, that was a lot of losses piled at one time.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And then just even more recently, I lost my youngest sister. That was like 5 months ago,
Oh, wow.
and that was really tough because she was very strong, and she didn't quite accept that she was going to succumb to the cancer. At first, she had refused to get treatment, so she had disappeared for a year. So the cancer was still getting aggressive in her body until now, when she was having complications. She couldn't eat, and then that's when she started coming back to us, asking us to help her. So we took her to the oncologist, and who was really nice, and they started the treatment, but unfortunately she didn't. After 2 years of that, she also passed away 5 months ago.
Mm.
So it's been a lot of losses. How do I cope with that? I think mostly remembering uh, the pain that they were in. First of all, I think that has helped me to kind of accept that I wouldn't have wanted to continue being selfish and having them around when they were suffering so much. So in one aspect, maybe just putting it in the back of my mind, and accepting that the pain would have been too much for them, so it's okay for them to go. But on the other hand, they still, you every now and then I look at my phone, I see her number, or I see pictures, or I see her grandchildren, her daughter, and then it all comes back, and it's still uh, it's still a process. And 5 months is a really short time, especially when you're grieving, because it does take time. But it's just one step at a time.
I like how you're holding those conflicting feelings, right? So, one of our definitions of grief is that there's conflicting feelings. So, there's that feeling of, yes, they're out of pain, but then there's still, I miss them, right? And
Yeah,
just to be able to acknowledge those two things, I think is really important as we process grief.
yeah, yeah. I think we don't know that's how we're doing it, but I
Yes.
guess that's one way of coping.
Mhm. Yeah, Margaret, thank you so much for sharing. And this is a perfect example where we say we are all 100% grievers. So you sharing our story with us and others who are listening, most of us can relate to all the losses. So today's conversation is around why is it important to grieve and how did you do it? Like when you lost your sister, your mom, what helped you? And why is it important to go through that process of grieving?
I think one of the ways that I coped when with my sister is the fact that she has a daughter and two grandchildren. So I sort of directed my attention to my niece and her grandchildren, and trying to see how they're feeling, to see what they needed, taking the kids out to play with them, um, and giving my niece space to talk about her mom. So I would start by saying that I miss my sister, and that way she would be able to talk about her own mom and her feelings. So that was helpful for me.
That's amazing. That's the greatest point, right? When we can acknowledge our grief, we can open the door for others to share our grief. And we do a course on how to help children grieve, and one of the most important is to get them talking and to be able to share our grief so that they'll share their feelings with us. Yeah, that's amazing.
Mhm.
Did you find a difference between how you dealt with, let's say, your mom and how you dealt with your sister? Like, was there different things that you did?
Um, yes, I think having had my mom for a much longer time, I think um, mostly well, with my mom, she loved farming, she loved her cows and looking after the farm. So that was the other thing that my sister, one of my younger sisters, and I started doing, is looking after the her farm and making sure that she would be more proud of us, and we actually did a lot. We were able to do a lot more than she was doing, not because she was not able to, but she wasn't really reaching out to ask us for help. So she was having a few difficulties in managing the farm. So we had to streamline that. So that kept us really busy for about 2 years
Yeah.
until we got everything working. And once we got things working, then we felt, oh, mom would be so proud of us. And we still feel that way whenever we go to the farm, to see that things are working, and we just kind of feel her there. And I think maybe we're still grieving her, but I think in a positive way, we feel that she's really proud wherever she is.
Mm, that's so great. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I would just like to ask our viewers if they have other ways that they have coped with loss. I love that as a group here, we can actually talk about it, it's acknowledging it. I think most times we feel we don't want to talk about our losses, either to the person who has, like, let's say Margaret. I feel I don't want to talk to her about her sister, thinking that she'll feel bad. But most times, because all of us are grievers, we want to remember them. We want to remember. We want to share those memories. Want to talk about your sister. Want to remember her by name. So I would encourage everybody who is listening. Let's have these conversations. Let's ask the questions, because when we keep it inside, and that's what we talk about here in Grief Talk, it's like a kettle, right? I like that demonstration of a kettle, and we don't, it piles up, and one day the pressure is so big, and it's like and that's the impact of not talking about it. So I love this conversation so much. I like the way you say it about the kettle explosion. Call it.
Yeah, just about that emotional energy, right? It builds up and then all of a sudden it pops. But if we can let it out a little bit at a time, if we can talk about what's going on, if we can talk about those, we can talk about the good and the bad things. Again, sometimes we just talk about the good things. So I don't know if you've ever been at a funeral and there's only talk about the good things. But when we don't acknowledge that there was trouble, we had conflict, when we don't express those emotions or talk about those memories, we aren't truly being honest and actually processing all our emotions.
Yeah. So, Lady Captain, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing those losses with us, and taking the time to join us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. One last comment. When you said about talking to the person that who is grieved about their loved ones, I remember one time a friend of mine passed away. She was a golfer, and I happened to meet her sister almost maybe I think it was maybe 3 months later, and I mentioned to the sister that thinking that I was helping her, that her sister was such a loving person, and I loved her, and I knew her from golf, and she burst out crying, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know what to do. I felt so awful, but later on, because I have gotten to know the lady, she actually even talks about her sister now. But at that time, I felt, wow, I don't know, I shouldn't have brought it up, but I didn't think she was still grieving. I didn't realize, I didn't acknowledge that. So I think we also have to be sensitive about when we bring up the names of the ones that have gone.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for sharing that. And we never know what kind of relationship that person has had with. Everybody has a unique relationship, and so while one person has one view of that person because that person's impacted them a certain way, another person might have a totally different view. So we never know. So we never can assume. But we can ask and listen, and we can just be that heart with ears. And when we just listen to people and encourage them to talk, then we'll find out where they're at.
Yeah.
Has there been a special person in your life, Margaret, that's been just really helpful for you during this time? Or who's your safe place to go to?
I think my sister is also one of I have many sisters, and she and I can talk about the bad things. Like my sister, the one we lost recently, she was a bit reckless in her life. So sometimes we would talk about that and laugh about that. And I think we don't bring it to the front page saying that's how we're grieving. But I think that has helped us a lot to talk about the funny things that she did, or how she even was avoiding treatment, acknowledging that she was being reckless about it, but at the same time, uh, knowing that she had to do what she had to do, what she thought was the best for her.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's so good. And that's what we encourage. Like it could be a family member, but finding that person you can talk to, it's so important where
It
you can
is.
be honest because part of the grieving and the process of it is to be honest with ourselves, right? To say, this is how it is. Because most times we are not honest. Uh, we are afraid of being judged, we're afraid how someone might take it. So let's all find that person that you can be honest with, because that's a key to the process of grieving.
Yes.
Hmm. So if there's one thing you could leave our friends out there with, Margaret, what would that be in regards to the importance of grieving? Because the whole conversation was all about why we should, how we do it, how we cope. And I love it so much because every little nugget we can have is important to
Yes.
all of us.
Yeah. I think I lost my husband, 40, 38 years ago, my first husband. And the one thing that has kept me going is my kids. I was expecting my second born, and when I see my children, and that's why that I mean, I still get emotional when I think about him, but just seeing them and now seeing the grandchildren, the product of him, um, and even people like my dad who passed away, I still have a lot of fond memories and things that I see around. So I think maybe hanging on to something that is positive, that reminds you of the love that you shared with that person, I think to me has been the greatest comfort.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's huge. That's huge. How old are your kids, Margaret? Share with us.
So my firstborn is 42 years old. He has two grandchildren and a beautiful wife. And my grandchildren are 8 and 4. And that's where I am right now with them. And my other son is 40 years old. He just turned 40. He hasn't got a family yet, except he recently got a dog.
Nice.
Awesome.
And that it's funny, but even that kind of makes me feel good that he has somebody to share his life with. I would rather have a two-legged person, but maybe that will come too. But just seeing how they are and how much they love me just is so comforting.
That is
And I
so
have no
amazing.
doubt about that, like 100%.
Hmm.
This has been so good. This has been so good. And Grief Talk, Margaret, is where we share the stories, we share about lessons learned. And thank you so much for
Yes.
sharing with us how you've coped and sharing about the losses and what has helped you throughout life, even though you've had so many losses. And I think my biggest nugget was sharing those good memories, your children, talking to your sister's kids. It just keeps that process going, because again, we are all 100% grievers,
We are.
and it's just sharing what helps us to live, what helps us to not pile in things inside. How can we share? How can we find that safe place? And also your sister, that you can talk the good, the bad, and everything. I love that so much.
That's
Delhi, do you
awesome.
have?
Yeah, it's nice just to see your smile on your face, and you've come through so many losses, so it's nice to see, right, that strength, that losses don't have to tear us down. They can make us stronger. It sounds like you have a good support system. You have your children, you have your sister. So it's great to see somebody who can work through that process and then teach others. And thank you for sharing, because you're teaching and encouraging others today.
I love it.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and for our viewers and people who are listening now and later, please share with us how come to our podcast, come to our
Mhm.
grief talk. Let's share these stories because you just don't know how you could touch someone's life.
Yeah.
So until next Wednesday,
Mhm.
we're gonna have another special guest next
Yeah.
Wednesday too. So November and December, we are determined to bring in guests and just hear different stories, so that we can close the year with where we can create space for each other, a safe place where we can share these stories. And especially, darling, as Christmas comes, it's always not easy to celebrate, and be fully alive. So we are determined to bring stories so that we can help each other on this journey. Because remember, we are all 100% grievers. Until next time, take care.
Take care.
Enjoy your day. Thank you for joining us, Lady Captain.
Yes.
Thank you. Have a good day.
We will. Thanks. Bye.
And it's
Bye-bye.
nice that I met Darlene, so now I can
Yes.
put. I know who she is. I know where you're sitting. I can
Awesome.
actually see where you guys are. So that's wonderful. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.